All right, today we're going to go over the answers to the Unit 3 study guide about cell structure and function. So for questions 1 through 7, we're just matching organelles with their descriptions. So number 1 is ribosomes. Remember that ribosomes make proteins, which means that these are the organelles that make proteins, so the answer for number 1 is F. Number 2, endoplasmic reticulum. Remember that the endoplasmic reticulum is a network of tubes or membranes, and they are able to help make the lipid component or part of the cell membrane or plasma membrane. So number 2 is D. Number 3 is Golgi complex. Remember that the Golgi complex can help to modify and sort proteins. It can package them up also and send them to a different area of the cell or to export them out of the cell. So the answer for number 3 is B. Number 4, lysosomes. Remember that lysosomes are filled with enzymes so that they can break things down. So lysosomes break down organelles. They can break down other things in the cell too, but number 4 is G. Number 5 is vacuoles. Remember that vacuoles can store things, and they can be a large central vacuole like a plant cell, or you can have many small vacuoles like you would have in an animal cell. Either way, these sac-like structures are letter E. And number 6 is chloroplasts. Remember that chloroplasts collect energy from the sun and use that energy to store it in chemicals such as sugars. So number 6 is letter A. And then finally, number 7 is mitochondria. Remember that mitochondria are able to take the energy that is stored in food or in molecules such as glucose and then convert it to an energy source that is easily used by the cell, such as ATP. And so letter 7 is C. Next, we're going to go over the multiple choice questions. So number 8 says, which of the following is a function of the cell membrane? So if you recall, this cell membrane does the job of controlling what can go in and out of the cell because it's semi-permeable. That means that letter 8 is D. And then number 9 says, which of the following is a function of the nucleus? Remember that the nucleus kind of controls the cell's activity, and one of its most important jobs in doing that is housing genetic material, which means that A is number 9 because it stores DNA, which is genetic material. Number 10 says, which structure in the cell shown above stores minerals such as water, salts, proteins, and carbohydrates? When you look at this cell, we know it's a plant cell because it has a cell wall. That's represented by letter B, which means that that is not our answer, right? Because the cell wall provides support, but it does not store things. But you'll notice there is a large opening inside of this cell, and that is letter C. That is the central vacuole in a plant cell, and that is where plants are able to store things like water and sugars, etc. So number 10 is C. Number 11, which of the following is a function of the cytoskeleton? So the cytoskeleton, much like our own skeleton, helps the cell to maintain its shape, right? And so the cytoskeleton is letter A. It's that network of proteins that allows or supports the cell from the inside of the cell. Number 12 says, list 3 structures that are found in plant cells but not animal cells. So if you look at the cell above, notice that this is in fact a plant cell. So we can go through which structures are found in plants but not in animals. And so it's important to remember that plants have a large central vacuole. Plant animals usually have a vacuole that is small, and they have many of them rather than one large vacuole. Plants also have a cell wall. Animal cells only have a cell membrane. Plants have both a cell wall and a cell membrane. And then recall also that plants have chloroplasts. Remember that chloroplasts are able to convert energy from the sun into stored energy in molecules such as sugars. Animal cells are not capable of that, and so that's why animal cells, like us, need to get our food from other sources. And finally, number 13 says, what structure is the outside barrier of all cells? So this is a structure that is present in every cell, plant, animal, bacteria, fungi, all of them. So all cells have a cell membrane. Only some cells have cell walls, capsules, things like that, but all cells have a cell membrane. Next, we'll review a little bit about microscopes and microscopy. Number 14 says, who used a compound microscope to see chambers within cork and name them cells? And so if you recall from your notes, the first person to look at something under a microscope and identify cells specifically as a structure was Robert Hooke. So that's letter B. Number 15 says, looking at a cell under a microscope, you note that it is a prokaryote. How do you know? So if you think about prokaryotes, remember these are cells such as bacteria. They have a cell membrane. They have some structures internally, like the nucleoid and the mesosome and ribosomes, but they do not have one of the things that eukaryotes have, and that is the nucleus. So number 15 is C. Number 16 says, which type of microscope can produce three-dimensional images of a cell's surface? So three-dimensional images are formed only by scanning electron microscopes, and that's because they can build a detailed image of the surface of structures under the microscope. And then number 17 says, what is the magnification of a microscope? If the eyepiece is 10x, meaning that it magnifies something 10 times, and the objective lens is 40x. And so in order to find total magnification, if you recall, you'll take the eyepiece magnification and then multiply that by the objective magnification, and that will give you the total magnification, which in this case, 10 times 40 is 400x. Next, we'll look at the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes and plant cells and animal cells. Remember that animal cells and plant cells are both eukaryotic cells. Bacteria cells are prokaryotes. So number 18 says, which of the cells is a plant cell? So if you remember, plant cells are eukaryotes, meaning that they have a nucleus, but they also have a cell wall. And so plant cells are letter A. Number 19 says, which of the cells is a prokaryote? We know that A is a plant cell. B also has a nucleus, which means that it cannot be a prokaryote, which means that for us, letter C is the correct answer because that bacteria cell is a prokaryote. Next, we'll start some multiple choice. Number 20 says, which of the following is not a part of cell theory? So first, let's review some things that are true about cell theory. Cell theory states that cells are the basic units of life. Cell theory also states that all things are made of cells that are alive, and that cells come from other cells. So the only thing here that is not part of cell theory is letter C, and that is that very few cells are able to reproduce, when in fact there are many different cell types that are able to reproduce. Number 21 says, which of the following encloses their DNA in a nucleus? So here we're looking for cells that have a nucleus. So if you remember, plant cells have a nucleus, animal cells have a nucleus, bacteria cells do not have a nucleus. There is no nucleus present in this cell. We also know that fungi have nuclei, and that viruses do not have a nucleus because viruses are not cells. They're a separate type of structure. So number 21 is C. Eukaryotic cells, which include plant cells and animal cells, have a nucleus. Number 22 says, which of the following organisms are prokaryotes? So remember, a prokaryote is any cell that does not have a nucleus. And so that means that the only organism on this list that does not have a nucleus is letter C, the bacteria cells. Finally, we'll answer number 23. Number 23 says list all of the or three types of organisms that have a cell wall. So if you recall that plants, in fact, have a cell wall, bacteria have a cell wall, and then the third type of cell with a cell wall are fungi. Animal cells do not have a cell wall, they only have a cell membrane. On this page of the study guide, we will review some vocabulary. So, number 24 is a light microscope. Remember that light microscopes use light to illuminate a subject, and because the subject does not have to be cut into smaller pieces when it's being viewed, you can view specimens that are still alive under a light microscope. So 24 is C. Number 25, electron microscope. So electron microscopes give you greater detail, but you cannot view live specimens with an electron microscope. So number 25 is B. Number 26, eukaryotic cells. So remember that eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So number 26 is E. Number 27, prokaryotes. These are cells that do not have a nucleus. They still have DNA, but it's not enclosed in a nucleus. So number 27 is D. And then number 28 is bacteria. Remember that bacteria are part of the group of organisms we call prokaryotes. So 28 is A. In the next group of terms, we will look at the function of some of the different cell organelles. So we'll start with number 29. 29 says cytoplasm. Remember that cytoplasm surrounds all of the different organelles that are inside of the cell and fills the cell. So number 29 is E. It's that fluid around everything in the cell, including the nucleus. Number 31 is the nucleus. So the nucleus, remember, houses genetic material, and genetic material has the job of giving instructions about how to make proteins. So 31 is C. Number 32. This is the cilia or the flagella. So these are both things that project from the cell. And so that means that they can help a cell move if they are have motility proteins. So 32 is A. Number 33, chloroplasts and mitochondria. So both of these organelles are involved in energy conversion, whether they are converting energy to a form that's easy to store or converting energy to a form that's easy for the organism to use. They both convert energy, and so this is letter B. And then number 34 is the cell wall. The cell wall is the structure that goes around plants that allows them to be supported and protected, and it's quite rigid. So number 34 is D. On the last two pages of the study guide, we're going to look at animal cells and plant cells, and we are going to identify some of the structures within those cells. So first we're going to look at this cell. This is number 35, and this is an animal cell. So remember, animal cells do not have a cell wall. That's one of the major giveaways that this is in fact an animal cell, not a plant cell. So number 36 is the labeling portion. So we're just going to start with letter A. So letter A is pointing to this structure. That is the mitochondria. Remember that mitochondria are responsible for converting energy from sugars into energy in a molecule called ATP. Next, we'll look at letter B. Letter B is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So this whole system of tubes that work their way through the cell but are not covered in ribosomes makes it apparent that it is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Letter C, this whole structure here is the nucleus. So remember, the nucleus houses the DNA of the cell, and it sends that message out to the ribosomes when proteins need to be constructed. Letter D. This is a structure within the nucleolus So that's this guy, and that is the nucleolus that helps with ribosome production. Letter E is pointing to this structure that goes all around the nucleus. It's covered in ribosomes, and it assists with protein production. So that's the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And then letter F is pointing to, in this picture, it's kind of greenish. That's the Golgi apparatus that processes proteins and then packages them up for movement around the cell or to export from the cell. And finally, the last structure is everything around the outside of the cell. In an animal cell, the very outermost layer is the cell membrane or plasma membrane, and that controls what goes in and out of the cell. Finally, we've made it to the last page of the study guide. The first question says, what kind of cell is this? Our major clue is the presence of a cell wall and a cell membrane, which means that this is a plant cell. Next, we will look at some individual structures. So first we'll start with letter A, which is this layered structure that's kind of a green color. This is the Golgi complex. Remember that the Golgi complex helps to process and package proteins. Letter B is pointing to the entire structure here that's represented in purple. This houses the genetic material. Letter B is the nucleus. Letter C is this layered structure that surrounds the nucleus. If you'll notice, it's covered in little dots. Those little dots are ribosomes, and the structure that is letter C is pointing to is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Letter D is pointing to an adjacent structure. It's also a network of tubes and it's layers of tissue, but it is not covered in ribosomes, which means that it is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Letter E is this large structure in the middle. This is the central vacuole, and it is used for the storage of food and water and things like that in the plant cell. Letter F is pointing to these green structures. They've got a whole bunch of little stacks of things that look like green pancakes inside. These are the chloroplasts, and they help to convert sunlight energy into food energy or chemical energy. Letter G is pointing to the outermost layer of a plant cell. In plant cells, this is the cell wall, because remember that the cell wall is superficial to the cell membrane. Letter H is pointing to the cell membrane. You can see that cutaway section where the cell wall is not shown, so that you can see that thin inner layer of the cell membrane, which controls what is allowed to go in and out of the plant cell. And finally, letter I is pointing to the mitochondria. So remember that mitochondria convert energy from sugars into energy found in a molecule called ATP. ATP is important because that is how energy is provided to different cell parts so they can carry out their functions.